I would like to ask, what in your view is economical right now to do in the sustainable area, development area? Do the business people in India know what's good business right now? And if not, what can we do about that? And what, in your opinion, needs to change in government policy to make sure that anything we do in sustainable development is not only sustainable, but is also development?
Thank you, President Clinton. May I say, on a day when everyone's congratulating Senator Clinton, and I add my voice to that on her tremendous new position, may I also take the liberty of congratulating you, President Clinton, on your role of leadership in this area of climate, and on, of course, convening this wonderful body here, but making climate the center of this panel, which I wasn't expecting, and I think that's really wonderful, so thank you for that. In terms of your question, sir, I think that there are some key components of this. The first is, I was talking to an Indian climate negotiator about Rio, and he said, Uday, we had been so outmaneuvered over WTO, where our negotiating team was so unprepared compared to the North, that per capita emissions were a very easy way for us to defend our position while we figured out a way to respond to what we felt was a Northern issue being imposed upon us. I think we've moved a long way since then. And for the first time, we've started to see this as our issue. And so my starting point is the politics of this. When we realized that, and it's only a small part of the political establishment, but it's beginning, we realized that this really is our issue. It's an issue of development, not an issue being imposed upon us. And I'll just briefly take 3 symbols of that, President Clinton, because they've shifted my family foundation's focus completely. 1, the shift in the monsoon. India depends upon that monsoon. Rajasthan, a desert, is right next to the Punjab, the breadbasket. The monsoon moves by half a degree, 1 billion people starve. We had the effects of the tsunami. We saw what that did. We think about coastal flooding in Bangladesh and in our country, it could be devastating. And finally, the Tibetan Plateau. If those rivers give out, 1 billion people will be without water security. So once you take on the fact that this is our problem, not a problem being imposed upon us by the North, you have to mobilize. I think that there has been a response. One of your members is Suzlon, who I hope the chairman's here today, has made India move from number 11 to number 4 in global wind power. But it's not something we can do alone. And the biggest question I've been asking myself is, how do you deal with the question that you posed about financing? And so I believe that there's a fundamental problem with the road to Copenhagen and the Bali Agreement. And that problem is the fact that I don't think we are engaging the private sector enough and financial institutions who have been the core of the global economy enough. Now, I know this is an unfashionable time to talk about private financial institutions, but I think this is really critical. Countries like mine require hundreds of billions of dollars to retool our economies. And at the same time, fiscal resources of the North are fundamentally strained right now. We're not going to have a great Marshall Plan that moves hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money from the North to the South. So how are we going to fix that funding gap? A small initiative that we're involved with, I think, might be an interesting clue. So we got together with another US foundation and brought together some of the largest pension funds in the world. CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York Common, 3 of the largest US pension funds, ABP out of Europe, the Australian superannuation system, and we posed them the challenge of how do you fundamentally raise the level of private investing. The World Bank estimates that only 14% of transfers will come from governments. 86% has to come from private sources. That's been mainly looked on by economists as a matter of capital markets and carbon markets, and that's very important. But I think it's also time for us to think about those institutional innovations that can actually move that capital. We've taken the example of CalPERS in America that put a few $100 million into a program called Green Wave, and that program leveraged billions of dollars of private capital. It anchored private fund managers to go out there and raise billions of dollars. And today, CalPERS has created an industry in America. And we want to use that as a precedent, as an analog for what could be done at a global level, to create 5 funds of $50 to $100 billion each for the most important regions on the planet, for China and India, for example, to incent our countries to step up to the global deal. We don't think there's enough magnetism in that deal right now. So how would that happen? Well, the pension funds and the insurance companies, private capital providers would be anchored into the largest private fund managers in the world, KKR and Carlyle and TPG, who are currently not at all engaged in this to the extent they could be, and leverage that with infrastructure funding. And the role of government, the difference about this proposal is that instead of seeing the governments as the core of fiscal transfers, we trust capitalism. And governments only act to shift risk-reward balances like the SBIC or OPIC programs in America, but on a global scale. If we come to India with $100 billion of real capital, I think that the negotiating dynamic will change. So I think there are many things we can do. In terms of the states in India, I think they want to. We're working with them on policy. But there is a funding gap to do with the real economics of these technologies. And I think private capitalism, even today, with all these crises, can help address that, so long as governments can be midwives.